with clenched fists. Pride filled him at the sight of his starter's determination to win. Kaiser suddenly became engulfed in a terrifying blue energy that crackled like electricity before steadying slightly around Kaiser's body. He could only watch in awe as Kaiser snarled and then charged at his foe, his body still covered with the draconic energy. As that dragon rush, Steven watched with widened eyes as Kaiser crashed into his Metagross. The cry that came out of Metagross was the loudest thus far in the battle. It had even been pushed back a few yards by the force of the attack. He smiled, Metagross, bowl. Just as Steven was about to give another order, he realized something. Ash sighed, his eyes closing for a brief moment. You gave it your all, Kaiser. Dratini is unable to battle, Metagross is the winner. Brock exclaimed after he observed Kaiser lying in front of Metagross without showing any signs of movement. A smile crossed Ash's features as he recalled Kaiser back into his Pokeball. He could only be proud of the way Kaiser had fought. His willpower to defeat Metagross was so strong that he'd learned a powerful new attack in order to do that. He looked at Steven, who petted his Metagross head across the battlefield. Did your Dratini just learn that Dragon Rush? Steven asked, recalling his starter and walking towards Ash. Yeah, Ash replied in a low voice. An unusual burst of satisfaction energized him. I didn't think he would be able to battle after he took that flash cannon. Steven smiled as he put a comforting hand on Ash's shoulder. That was great, Ash. I can't wait for us to battle again once Kaiser is stronger. Neither can I, Ash replied back merrily. That was quite interesting. The familiar voice made Ash and Steven turn around. Ash's lips parted at first, then he smirked when he saw his first rival walking towards them. I was wondering where you were. And I was wondering what you were doing in the SS. And after you said that you wouldn't be here, Gary snorted, folding his hands as he came to a stop in front of them. And I find that your starter was a Dratini and not Charmander. Ash scratched his head, slightly sheepishly. He hadn't intended to hide that fact from Gary. However, he thought that Gary might complain and ask for Ash to use Kaiser in their last fight. That's right. It's nice to see you again, Gary, Steven interjected with a bright smile as Gary turned to face him. You too, Steven, Gary grinned and he high-fived Steven's hand. Your Metagross is something else. But I expected as much from you. He leaned forward and smirked, his eyes contained an eager twinkle. Are you ready for a battle with me? Yeah, I want to see how strong your Pokémon are, too, Steven responded, his eyes locking Gary's into a fierce yet respectful gaze. Ash could relate to the feeling. It hadn't been that long since he fought Gary, but it was long enough for him to have gotten a few new tricks up his sleeve. I'll see you guys in a bit. I've got to take Kaiser to the Pokémon Center, Ash said, slightly disappointed that he'd missed some of their match, but the health of his Pokémon took priority. He turned around once he'd received nods from Gary and Steven. Ash began to walk away from the arena, but a firm hand on his shoulder halted him. He turned to find it was Brock. Ash, I can take Kaiser and get him healed up. You can stay here. Ash's lips parted, not speaking for a moment. That'd be great, thanks, Brock. He was about to refuse, not wanting to cause Brock any trouble, but his desire to watch the battle between his two rivals swayed his mind. He handed Kaiser's Pokeball over to Brock, who smiled at him and disappeared into the crowd of people who still hadn't left. Ash turned his attention towards his rivals. Gary's gaze fixated on Steven, who'd taken his position opposite him. The quiet face-off between two of his rivals had Ash's adrenaline rush. Considering how strong Steven was, having already been a trainer for longer than Gary and himself, Ash didn't have much doubt that Steven would win again. Yet, Ash looked forward to seeing the new tricks Gary had come up with in the last month and a half. Here we go, stud. Gary tossed his Pokeball lightly and his Wartortle materialized in front of him. Steven tapped his own Pokeball and his Metagross took the field. Studs roars against an indomitable wall-like Metagross, who appeared just as nonchalant as it was when it faced Kaiser, were met with nothing but an icy cold stare from Metagross. "Stud, use Water Pulse," Gary ordered. He appeared somewhat uneasy underneath the exterior of composure. In his heart, Gary probably knew the way this match would turn out. "Meteor Mash." Steven's voice was calm as if this was just another battle for him. Ash hadn't noticed it in the heat of his own battle with the Stone Fanatic. Water ebbed and flowed from Stud's mouth until it took the shape of a pulsating ball and he shot it towards his foe while Metagross slipped through the field with its right hand glowing gold. As the water pulse came closer, Metagross crushed it with a mere punch, making it burst into a flurry of water, and continued to charge forward until it hammered its fists into Stud, a few golden stars pouring out when the Steel-type attack connected. The turtle Pokémon gave out a cry as he used the support of his hands to keep himself standing. Gary smirked. "I expected that to happen. Now bite it." Stud rose back up again and scurried towards Metagross, who wasn't too far away from it. It dug its fangs, which glowed black, into the steel type, earning a cry from Metagross. Ash observed the battle carefully. Stud's bite could deal serious damage to a psychic type, and it would have, had Metagross not had such great defensive abilities. Either way, the type effectiveness worked in Gary's favor this time. Ash noted that he needed to focus on having some of his Pokémon learn attacks that would give them coverage against Pokémon. For Kaiser, an ensemble of fire-type attacks would prove helpful. "Metagross, use Zen Headbutt," Steven commanded. "Withdraw," Gary countered hastily. Metagross jerked its head down and bolted forward, its eyes glowing blue while violet energy leaked from the top of its head. Stud retreated into his shell, a faint blue hue pulsing around him. Ash cringed, closing his eyes tight for the poor Pokémon. Despite Stud's defense, Metagross collided head-on, and the impact sent him flying backwards next to Gary. Gary's fists clenched at the sight of his Wartortle shakily steadying himself as he came out of his shell. "Hydro Pump, give it your all. Let's finish it with a quick bullet punch, shall we, Metagross?" Steven said, his lips twitching ever so slightly. Stud retreated back into his shell but this time spun around and strong streams of water came out of each of the openings. Metagross had already reached its target though as it struck Stud's body with its glowing fist, not caring about the sum of the hydro pump hitting him. Steven's Pokémon roared once it saw that its opponent just laid on the ground, knocked out. Ash wryly smiled at the outcome. Gary sighed before a smile crept up to his face. "You gave it your all, Stud," he whispered as he recalled his fainted starter. "I'll say that you've raised it really well, Gary," Steven commented as he walked forwards. "It's just been a few months since you guys started out, right?" "Yeah," Gary said, "I didn't expect any less of your starter. It's already a powerhouse." He suddenly jerked his head to his left and his lips curled up into a wicked smirk. "It's your turn now, Ashy boy. I'll make up for this loss with a win over you." "You will." Ash raised an eyebrow, walking towards Gary and Steven. "What if I don't allow it?" "I'll force you." Gary leaned towards Ash, his glare viciously challenging. "You're gonna battle me right now. Hoenn too, unlike last time." "I can't wait to see you lose, Gary, but," Ash grinned back before glancing at the Pokeball in Gary's hand. "You'll need to get Stud healed up first." "I won't need Stud to beat you," Gary retorted. "You don't have your starter right now, so I don't need to use mine." "If you're that eager," Ash sighed, running his fingers through his Pokeball belt and thought about his choice. "Then I won't refuse." "Well, now," Steven beamed. "I'm looking forward to this." Meanwhile, there was an announcement that got the attention of everyone. The SS, Anne is now departing. Our destination is Sevi Islands. We hope you enjoy your journey. Ash walked to the end of the battlefield where Steven stood while Gary returned to where he'd had his last battle. Without hesitation, Ash grabbed a Pokeball and pointed it forward. Tia, I choose you. Ash had planned on letting Tia get some more exposure to real Pokemon battles while he was on the SS. And what better way to do that than to fight against his childhood rival? The Ralts materialized and cooed at her release. A Ralts, ha, Gary smirked. His face brimmed with his usual haughty confidence as he removed a Pokeball from his pocket. Interesting. He pointed the Pokeball forward and out of it came a small red and cream-colored dog, a muffled woof to signal its arrival. Its husky tail bobbed up and down and its sharp eyes locked on Tia, keenly awaiting a battle. So, you've caught a Growlithe. Ash muttered. They were said to be extremely loyal Pokemon and gave their all in battles. And they were made to battle and protect their partners. Growlithe not only had great maneuvers, but their evolved form, Arcanine, were considered extremely strong Pokemon, even in the wild. They could learn a variety of moves and, hence, could counter different situations. Tia, use confusion, Ash commanded after running through various battle scenarios in his mind like a game of chess. Flame Wheel, ordered Gary. Tia put her hands forwards, her eyes glowing blue as she tried to take control over Growlithe's mind. The fire-type grunted, closing its eyes, but shook off the attack and surrounded itself with fire, hurling up inside of the flames. Use double team now, Ash shouted, as Growlithe's body became a sea of flames that rolled toward her. Tia made duplicates of herself. Growlithe struck one of them, but passed right through the illusion which disappeared on impact. However, it didn't give up then as it rolled towards another copy. Concentrate and use Flamethrower. Gary's eyes narrowed and Ash was sure he was trying to find the best approach to win the battle. Behind his arrogant demeanor, the oak was as sharp in tactics as they came. Growlithe had managed to fight off Tia's confusion without too much difficulty, and the double-team illusions wouldn't last long. Fairy-type moves weren't very effective against fire-types, so Tia was at a disadvantage since the only attacking move that she knew that wasn't fairy-type was confusion. Use Disarming Voice, Ash ordered, absent-mindedly scratching his chin. The illusions had disappeared when Growlithe opened its maw and let loose a flurry of flames at Tia. The Ralts called forth every bit of strength she had and cried, waves in the form of faint pinkish hearts colliding with the incoming flamethrower. Ash pursed his lips as he saw the disarming voice being overpowered by the flamethrower. Dodge it! Tia tried to slip out of the way of the attack, but Growlithe only had to redirect it a bit to the left where she'd jumped. And although she had been quick to try and evade it, Tia couldn't completely get out of the way as the flames stung deep into her fragile body. Damn, Ash cursed under his breath. Growlithe had been trained well, and he shouldn't have expected any less from Gary. Ash saw his rival smirk at the outcome of the bout, which he made sure to return with as much vigor. Disadvantage or not, he couldn't allow himself to lose to Gary a second time. I know you can do it, Tia. He cheered his little psychic type who looked back at her trainer and cooed with a determined look on her face. Disarming voice again. Flame Wheel, Gary ordered, his voice coarse. Tia jerked her head back and released her shriek of pink energy while Growlithe tucked its feet in and made a wheel of flames around itself. As it headed towards its foe, it was struck by the heart which packed draining fairy energy, which made it whimper but its attack didn't stop. Tia tried to jump out of the way of the incoming blow but she wasn't fast enough. She shrieked as the flames from Growlithe's moves engulfed her. It seems you've been slacking off without teaching your Pokémon anything, Ash, Gary commented as he folded his arms and sneered at his rival. Ash didn't respond to the obvious taunt thrown at him, but he'd thought of a plan that could neutralize the battle. Tia had already taken too much damage, as evidenced by the injuries on her body. If there was one thing that Ash thought was Tia's weakness, it was her endurance. Her body was still frail, and it wasn't her fault. Ralts, as Pokémon, weren't the most durable until they evolved. So, he'd only get one chance to turn the tide of this battle. Bite. Gary's fists clenched briefly. He'd probably thought that Growlithe would have had the better of Tia by now. Brace yourself and let it come to you, Tia. Ash narrowed his eyes at Growlithe charging at Tia with bared fangs. As Growlithe was inches away from Tia, Ash shouted, "Now, Hypnosis." Growlithe successfully dug its claws into Tia's arm, earning a cry from the emotion Pokémon. Tia, though, appeared focused as her eyes glowed and she gazed right into Growlithe's eyes. The pup yelped, its hold on Tia's arm getting weaker as it fell on the ground. Gary gritted his teeth. "You tricky bastard," he mumbled as he saw his Growlithe fall asleep. "Wake up, Growlithe." Ash pumped his fist slightly. He'd been training with Tia trying to make full use of Hypnosis. It was a move that required direct eye contact with the opponent for a few seconds. The success rate of using Hypnosis in a battle was very low, making it an unpopular move for trainers, but Ash figured that at times like these, it might prove to be Tia's ace in the hole. She'd done well to hang on until then, even after taking hits from Growlithe's fire-type moves. "We've gotta end it while it's asleep, Tia," Ash informed her in a serious tone. Draining kiss. Tia purred and kissed her hand before sending a pink-colored heart at Growlithe at close range. It grunted in pain while the drained energy revitalized Tia's body. Gary's cries for Growlithe to wake up seemed to fall on deaf ears as Tia sent a second flying kiss at Growlithe. "Growlithe," Gary yelled worriedly, "get up and use Bite." This was enough to make Growlithe break its slumber. Its eyes were sharp as it barked and closed the short distance between itself and Tia. It drove its fangs inside Tia's white skin and this time it didn't let go, neither did it look at Tia's eyes. "Get back and use Draining Kiss," Ash commanded. His heart thumped in his chest. "That's it, Growlithe, bite again," Gary cheered, "and then finish it with Flame Wheel." Tia jumped a few steps back, wincing as blood oozed from the fresh bite marks and trickled to the ground. Growlithe barked and dashed forward, its fangs dangerously closing in on Tia. Just as Tia released her draining kiss, Growlithe bit her again before being struck by the fairy-type attack. "Hang in there, Tia," Ash said softly, but he grimaced at the sight of his Ralts wailing at the pain. Even though the draining kiss hit Growlithe, Tia's wobbling and wailing matched the move's strength, passing through the pup as if it had been padded. Growlithe's eyes flared with a burning ember as flames licked around his fur. The fire-type attack bustled with energy and cackled like a whip, but Tia fell to the ground before the move could be released, unconscious. With pursed lips, Ash recalled Tia. "That was great, Tia," he sighed. "We'll just have to work even harder on your moves." He couldn't help but smile as he readied his next Pokeball. On the other side of the field, Gary petted his Growlithe, who panted and barely stood its ground with bruised legs. "You were great as always," Gary beamed at his Pokémon. Tia had given it a hard time and almost won. Had Growlithe woken up a few moments later, Tia's close-range draining kiss would have sealed its fate. "It's too bad that you can't use Stud," Ash said confidently as he released his second Pokémon. "Ignis would have loved to get his revenge, but he'll make do by beating whichever Pokémon you have for now." "So, it's evolved," Gary smirked. Ash felt a hint of enthusiasm in Gary's words but only for a moment. "Too bad for you that you've set such unrealistic goals for your Charmeleon." "We'll see about that, won't we?" Ash scoffed. "Ignis, get in close and use Slash." Wait for it to come to you and then bite, Gary said to his Pokémon. While training in the week remaining before the departure of the SS, Ignis had learned Slash. It was an enhanced version of Scratch, which Ignis already knew, so he didn't need to practice much to use it properly. Ignis and Growlithe charged at one another. Ignis' claw glowed silver while Growlithe opened its mouth wide. As the two neared each other, the Charmeleon brought down his claws and slammed them on Growlithe's face. Before it could even complete its own move, Ignis roared and slashed with his other hand as well. The force of the impact sent Growlithe soaring backwards through the field. Gary gritted his teeth at the outcome. Charmeleon's a lot stronger than last time, he muttered, but was loud enough for Ash to catch the words, recalling his fainted Growlithe. Ash grinned. Way to go, Ignis. Even though Growlithe was already on its last legs after its battle with Tia, the efficient way in which Ignis finished the battle made him extremely happy. After evolution, the flame Pokémon seemed to have developed an instinct that would make his foes fear him. Let's see how you handle this. Gary's grin returned as he drew a Pokeball from his pocket. The Pokémon he'd chosen was a round-shaped, rocky body with 2 arms. Going for the type advantage with a Graveler, Ash smiled. Ignis' biggest weakness apart from water types were rock and ground-type Pokémon. It doesn't matter, Ignis. Try Metal Claw. Close it off, Gary called. Use Rollout. Ignis had dashed towards Graveler, showing its superior speed, but just as he was about to slam his shining claws into Graveler, the rock type curled itself into a ball and began rolling. Ignis bolted to his left to avoid the close-range attack. That might be a problem to get through, Ash scowled. Don't let it near you while it's rolling for now. Get back and use Dragon Rage. As Graveler's rolling body turned around and rushed towards Ignis yet again, the Charmeleon formed an orb of draconic energy and fired a thick stream towards Graveler. The energy wrapped around Graveler tightly, but fizzled out like a shot in seconds. Ignis narrowly leapt out of the way again. But Ash noticed Graveler getting faster. Regardless, this was also a chance to keep on wearing down Graveler's defenses. Dragon Rage again, Ash ordered. Keep going, Graveler, Gary said, stamping his foot forward as he encouraged his rock type. A repeat of their previous clash happened with Ignis hitting Graveler with his draconic stream. Though, this time, when Ignis tried to slide away from the incoming rock, Graveler took a sharp turn and struck it in the gut. Ignis let out grunts of pain as the attack flung him backwards, skidding the ground, trying desperately to regain traction. Gary pumped his fists. Again, Graveler. Ash waited for a moment to give out his next command. Rollout wouldn't last much longer, so should he try to get another hit on Graveler at the risk of Ignis being unable to evade it, or should he just take the safer option? Finally, he ordered, wait for it, and dodge at the last moment. Graveler rolled back again towards Ignis, who didn't try to attack this time. He stared daggers into the rolling Pokémon, watching it inch closer, and just as it was inches away from him, Ignis jumped to his left swiftly. Graveler finally halted its movements and stood again. The two Pokémon glared and roared at one another. Now magnitude, Gary ordered. There was no chance to evade it. Take it on, Ignis. Ash bit his lip. He wasn't fond of letting his Pokémon take direct hits on purpose. Then close in and use Metal Claw. Graveler jumped and then landed back on the ground again, sending shockwaves throughout the field. Some debris whirled up from the ground and even went into the eyes of the people watching, who turned to shield their faces. Ignis let out a low grunt as he braced himself, and when he was ready, dashed forward with his claws shining silver. Rock throw when it's close, Graveler, Gary shouted. Keep using Metal Claw to fight it off for as long as you can, Ash said. As Ignis slashed Graveler with his steel-like claws, it wailed but formed rocks around its body and aimed them towards its foe. Ignis, meanwhile, kept hacking it with his claws relentlessly, even slashing the incoming rocks. Even as the stones that he couldn't thrash ripped his skin, he didn't let up his assault. That's the way, Ignis. Ash pumped his fist ardently. Heap at it, and then finish it with Dragon Rage. Quickly, get into rollout. Gary's face paled as he shouted. It seemed he hadn't expected Ignis to take on Rock Throw without so much as flinching. Ignis slid his claws into Graveler once more before he jumped a few steps backwards and charged draconic energy in his maw. Just as the Graveler was about to curl into itself, the Dragon Rage struck it and it went down with a wail. Ash smiled when he saw that Graveler didn't move. You were great, Ignis. He walked forward and petted Ignis on the head, who roared in acknowledgement after a hard stare at Gary. Gary recalled his Graveler and walked towards Ash. Damn it, Ketchum, he jeered, you somehow won this time. Ash lightly tapped Ignis with his Pokeball and turned to look at Gary. What did I tell you? He smirked. Gary shrugged at that before smiling. Don't get too cocky, we're still even. Not for long, Ash said tauntingly. You'll be lagging behind after our next battle. That's the Ash and Gary I know, Steven commented from beside them. You two just keep going at each other, don't you? Ash scratched the back of his head and smiled. That's how it is. Gary needs someone to keep him in check. Ash laughed after he said that. This was all the banter that he loved having with Gary. They'd had this plenty of times already, and he didn't mind if it continued to be that way. He had to admit that Gary was annoying at times with his jibes, but Ash knew that it was all in good humor. At least, that's how he saw it. How about you keep yourself in check? Gary snickered. Anyway, let's get our Pokémon healed up before we do anything else. Yeah, Ash nodded at the suggestion. He didn't enjoy keeping his Pokémon injured for long. He glanced around to check if Brock was back and saw him walking towards them. Hey, Brock, he called. Thanks for taking Kaiser to the Pokémon Center. Brock stopped in front of Ash and smiled. Don't mention it. Here's Kaiser's Pokeball. He's all healed up. Ash took the Pokeball from Brock and attached it to his belt. Me and Gary just had a battle, so we're going back to the Pokémon Center. Brock's face perked up. I don't mind visiting the Pokémon Center again and again. Ash half laughed at that, raising an eyebrow. That's interesting, but since you want to become a Pokémon doctor, I can somewhat understand that. He'd stopped short of revealing his true thoughts at the matter. He hadn't forgotten Brock awkwardly staring at Nurse Joy when they'd first entered Vermilion City. And based on those assumptions, he could make a guess why Brock loved visiting the Pokémon Center too often. All four of them went to the Pokémon Center on the left of the hall and let the Pokémon that had battled get checked up and healed. There were 2 counters in the Pokémon Center, each minded by a Nurse Joy. Since he'd seen the same doors on the right side of the hall too, Ash figured that there might be 3 more of the same there. The SS. Anne was amazing indeed. Later that day, the group spent most of their afternoon on a tour of the main hall of the ship. They checked out the various shops. Some sold TMs and others had various Pokémon guidebooks which covered topics such as gym battles, Pokémon contests and even Pokémon performances. Not to mention the several shops selling various items Pokémon could use, including evolution stones. Certain things interested Ash, but he didn't have too much use for them for now. He thought about buying the TM for Flamethrower but decided against it because he thought that Ignis was on the verge of learning it anyway. It was an attack that came naturally to a fire type, so he'd be working on strengthening Ember and turning it into Flamethrower soon enough. Then, he could even teach Kaiser the fire type move, something that he needed to enhance his move pool. Once evening came, the crowds in the main hall dwindled to only a few in sight. Ash yawned, drowsiness tugging lightly at his eyelids. The explosive battles around him turned to meager chit-chats with an occasional good night. Ash and Brock shared a room, but Gary and Steven both had rooms in different sections of the ship, so the group parted after having dinner. Their room was fairly spacious with 2 beds, not dissimilar to the ones they had shared in the Pokémon Center. Although, these beds seemed a lot more luxurious and comfortable. As Ash sat on his bed and opened his backpack, he saw a glint bleeding out from inside of it. It was the feather that he'd found in one of his nights in Viridian Forest, not long after he'd started his journey. It had shown the same hue of rainbow colors that night too, he recalled. That was the reason he'd picked it up after it had fallen from the night sky. It seemed special, hence why he hadn't shown it to anybody yet. He'd decided to ask Professor Oak about it, but he'd forgotten until now. The glow on the feather became fainter and fainter. Ash tucked it back inside his bag, deciding to research more about it later. His eyelids drooped and slowly became heavier, the bedroom becoming a chromatic blur. 5 more days to go before they reached the Sevi Islands. He let his loose body fall on the soft mattress, letting out a low moan as the fluffy sheets cushioned his fall. Closing his eyes, he fell asleep not long after. The next morning, Ash and Brock met up with Gary and Steven again. They observed a few battles in the main hull after having breakfast, and had a few battles themselves with the other trainers on board. Ash got a few matches in for everyone, but made sure that Tia and Trooper had more opportunities since they had limited experience in battle. It had been good practice for his Pokémon, and even though he'd lost a couple of battles along the way, against older and more experienced Pokémon trainers, they helped him and his Pokémon grow. All of those things had proved fruitful. Ash now stood with Trooper against a trainer's Quilava. The guy said he was from the neighboring Johto region and had begun his journey not too long ago. Trooper landed a few direct hits on his foe and had him on the ropes, although Quilava's speed had troubled him. "Get in close and use cross-chop," Ash said calmly. "Flamethrower around you," Ash's opponent yelled out quickly. Trooper crossed his fists and dashed, evading the flames that Quilava spat his way. He yelped in pain when another flurry of flamethrowers singed him, some of the cream fur on his body turning black. But he fought through it and charged as its glowing fists slammed into Quilava's head, the fire type letting out a final cry before its body stooped to the ground and ceased any movement. The trainer sighed as he recalled his Quilava. "You did well." Ash meanwhile smiled at Trooper, who'd walked back to his trainer and jumped around in joy. Ash bent down and petted the Mankey. "Great job, Trooper." He'd shown incredible growth as a battler. Ash recalled Trooper and walked towards his opponent. "That was a good match," he said as he offered a handshake. "Your Mankey is pretty good," the trainer complimented him as they shook hands. As Ash walked towards Brock, who was standing on the side of the battlefield, he noticed someone walk towards him. "Hi," the boy greeted them. He wore a jacket over his green shirt. Ash noted that he was probably around his age. "Hello," Ash greeted back. "My name's Richie," the boy said with a warm smile. "I'm Ash Ketchum," Ash introduced himself. "It's nice to meet you." "It's nice to meet you, too," Richie exclaimed exuberantly. "I've seen a few of your battles from today and yesterday. Do you mind battling with me too?" Ash grinned at the question. "I'm all for it. I doubt anyone would deny a Pokémon battle here." "That's great," Richie yelped excitedly. He got his Pokeball ready as soon as Ash had accepted his challenge. "As a one-on-one battle fine with you?" "Sure, that works," Ash agreed. The two stood on opposite sides of the field a few moments later. "Go, Sparky," Richie called as he raised his Pokeball, and out of it came a Pikachu. It had a few spiky hairs that stuck up from the rest of its fur. Ash thought about his choice for a moment before selecting a Pokeball from his belt. He led out Ava, who chirped her arrival, spreading her wings and taking flight a few feet above the ground. Ash wanted to check out how her recent training would benefit against an electric-type Pokémon. It was, after all, hardly aimed towards countering that weakness of hers. Richie's eyes widened at Ash's choice. "A Pidgeotto?" he questioned blankly. "You knew I was using Sparky and still went with a flying type." "Don't underestimate Ava just because she's at a type disadvantage," Ash warned with a smirk. "You might be surprised." "No way am I underestimating it," Richie said sincerely. "Sparky, let's test it out with Thunderbolt. Use Quick Attack to dodge," Ash commanded, "and then use Aerial Ace." As bolts of yellow electricity surged towards her from Richie's Pikachu's cheeks, Ava flew higher up, speeding up her movements with Quick Attack. She avoided all of the shocks that flew her way and ascended even more. She then dove with all the momentum behind her, silver streaks enveloping some of her body. As she neared the Pikachu, it ran back, narrowly jumping out of the way before Ava hit her mark the next time. "Thunderbolt right now," Richie called out hastily. On command, Pikachu let loose another bolt of electricity from its cheeks that zoomed in on Ava. The bird Pokémon's wings glowed silver as she dug one of them into the ground. Even as the Thunderbolt struck her, she shook it off, effectively halving the damage. That was what Ash had been training with her for over the past month now. She'd perfected Steel Wing recently after tons of training, and this was one of the reasons Ash wanted her to learn it. The move not only countered her weakness to Rock-type Pokémon, but could also be used in situations like these if she could ground her wings while using it. It reduced the damage from electric-type moves significantly because of the physics involved. Richie's mouth twitched. "Why does it look like Thunderbolt didn't do much to Pidgeotto?" he mouthed in surprise. "Did that Steel Wing reduce the damage?" "Yeah," Ash said. "Steel Wing when grounded can take out a lot of the damage from electric-type moves, but it's got its limits. The Pokémon has to be quick enough to get the timing exactly right. If they're not, it'd be better to just try to avoid the attack." Richie grinned. "That's something I'll have to try out, then. Sparky, let's use Quick Attack." "Use your Quick Attack too, Ava," Ash said just as he saw Sparky dash in a zigzag pattern on all fours. Then Aerial Ace. Ava's tail sparked a small air current as she moved into her fastest attack, meeting with the incoming Pikachu. The collision of the two quick attacks pushed both Pokémon backwards. Ava recovered quickly and soared towards the ceiling. "Thunderbolt before it hits you," Richie shouted worriedly. Ash didn't call for a move, simply watching Ava gain